Okay. Okay, here I am in Chipping Norton at Paul Fischer, the famous luthier's house. And I've known Paul for quite a while now. I'm going to talk to him a little bit about his new book called Let the Woods Speak. So, Paul, tell me about the book. I've read most of it now, and it's about your life and how you took up instrument making and we're in the army. So why did you write this book, first of all?
Well, I wrote it simply because there was a sort of empty period immediately after I had a severe stroke. And it was put to me by somebody I was teaching to make musical instruments. And, sorry, I was also teaching various other guys, but the first one happened to be a writer. And he listened to the many rather unusual and surprising stories that I could tell about life as a musical instrument maker. It's not exactly a normal profession, a regular profession, and it began in Oxford,
yes,
in a beautiful house set in the foothills of a park called Shotover Park, and in a house next door to the house belonging to C.S. Lewis, and began working there making harpsichords.
So how did you get into that? Were you at school at the time?
I was at school to begin with, yes, but it was put to me by the music master at school. He said, if anybody in the class, he asked if anybody in the class would like to make musical instruments, and I said, it sounds very interesting, please sir. Yes sir, I would like to make musical instruments.
And you ended up working with in the Goebel workshop,
Yes,
didn't you?
Robert Goebel, who was a very, at that time, a very famous maker of harpsichords. He had worked for Arnold Domich, and Arnold Domich was a very, very famous musicologist, but also instrument maker and a musical instrument. He was a fine musician.
So your first job was actually making harpsichords?
Early musical instruments, yes, yeah, harpsichords, clavichords, and spinets.
And was it a regime you think you learned from working there?
It's a very difficult regime, but it was certainly different to most other places of the time. It really was a bit of a hangover from the 19th century. The working conditions were a bit like that. And
so, for instance, you said that you weren't encouraged to look out of the window of your workshop.
That's a funny story, but it's true. I was literally told off for looking out of the window. I shouldn't look out the window so much. And I was actually, because at that time I often whistled, and
yes.
I was told not to whistle while I was working. And that's sort of the part of the 19th century character in which, the atmosphere in which we worked.
Do you think this actually influenced your later approach to working in a workshop? For instance, when you had other people working with you? Or
oh, crikey, not at all. No. I grew out of that. I was fortunate. After Robert Goebel and the harpsichords, I was fortunate at a slightly later date to meet up with David Rubio. David Rubio was really a fantastic maker of musical instruments. Early instruments as well. We made harpsichords and we made baroque instruments, a whole range of different baroque instruments. But modern guitar, the modern classical guitar.
Well, as that was the first time we met, actually, when I came up to the Rubio workshop. And I think you were, well, the only guitar maker there at the time.
That's right, yes. I joined David, and just the two of us worked together for, I think it was about 18 months, 2 years.
And you had other people coming to the workshop after that?
We did. We really started to expand then because the order list was just growing and growing and growing. Or for all instruments we made. I mean, because I was a harpsichord maker, yes. When I joined Rubio, he said, right, I'm going to make harpsichords as well. So because I could get straight in making these instruments. And he was very encouraged and influenced by that.
So one of my first guitars was actually made by you, but it had David Rubio's name on. Was this a common practice to actually
Well, not in this country, but it was in Spain.
Yes.
People who worked for famous makers in Spain were allowed to stamp their initials in the instrument, and Rubio did precisely the same. So all the instruments I made for David at the time had my initials stamped inside.
And going on from that, you've also actually helped other guitar makers along the road, haven't you?
Oh, I have, since then. I did teach a little bit at Rubio's, believe it or not.
Yes.
Believe it or not, there was a guy there by the name of Jones,
yes.
Edward Jones, but he originally learned to make guitars from me, not from David, as he would often say, because David at that time was working in a completely different workshop. I mean, it was still a Rubio workshop, but David had his own workshop. We had 3 workshops making different instruments in each: harpsichords, the plucked fretted instruments, and then the early bowed instruments. And David worked on his own on the bowed instruments.
I remember coming up and being amazed by the amount of activity going on. There's quite a lot, and there's quite a lot of experimentation as well. I remember when you were trying different things with guitars in those days.
We tried some rather unusual things, yes, different materials. I mean, we were beginning to learn that some of the more exotic tropical timber we used were becoming very scarce. So we were looking to use other woods for the body of the classical guitar.
So I would say this was pioneering work that you actually did with using different sorts of hardwoods for the back and sides, because you knew that Brazilian rosewood was going to run out at some point.
Yes, we were aware that there was a build-up of a lot of sort of a head of steam about using these very, very scarce tropical woods. So we were looking for alternatives and using alternatives.
So how long ago was this, Paul?
This
what year? year was
be
it?
1971, 72.
Yeah, so I would say you were probably very early users of different sorts of wood, and eventually you managed to get the Churchill Scholarship to go to Brazil and look at different sorts of wood.
That's right. I went off to, in the 1980s, the Churchill Trust funded a fellowship, a research fellowship in Brazil, in the rainforest around, up in the north, in the Amazona, but also in central Brazil, which is Bahia, where the best Brazilian rosewood actually does come from. It's a drier state. The Amazonas is a very, very humid area.
So what sort of woods did you actually find there which you could use? You did a famous experiment where I think John Mills played behind a curtain and people had to guess what wood the guitar was made of.
Well, it wasn't so much guess what wood, but they were asked to judge each instrument and also consider the qualities of the wood, how it responded, the character and the tone of sound of the instrument, and judge accordingly. But there was, in amongst the 8 instruments, the 8 experiments, there was 1 Brazilian rosewood. So there was a test, there was an instrument that everybody was familiar with, and they had to compare all the other instruments they were listening to, major different woods, compared with the 1 Brazilian. And in fact, nobody could tell the Brazilian from the rest of them.
So there's a bit of a myth there. I think many guitarists like to have their Brazilian rosewood guitar because it's so beautiful, but there are many beautiful woods available now.
That's correct, that's correct.
And partly thanks to what you've done.
Well, I mean, I could take some credit for that, because if nothing else, I was doing it long before anybody else was doing it. And of course, by 1992, Brazilian rosewood was actually banned. It was put on the Appendix 1 of the endangered species, so it was banned. So we had to consider other woods.
So tell me a little bit about your work helping other guitar and instrument makers in Britain.
Well, from about not the early 90s at all. It was during the time I was in Brazil, and post-Brazil, I started to teach here in the workshop. I had somebody with me in the workshop most of the time. I'm teaching, they're not working for me. I'm literally teaching them. So there were some important and great makers came out there, such as Christopher Dean. And 1 or 2 others didn't. They were good makers, but they didn't actually want to continue in making instruments. It's a very unusual profession. It doesn't appeal to everybody. No. Although I would hope it would, because I consider it a fantastic profession. Very rewarding. I don't mean financially. I mean, it's a very fulfilling profession.
But you played your part in the Arts Council as well, if I remember, or the...
Yes, I worked for the Arts Council, not the Arts Council, the Crafts Council.
The Crafts Council.
And the Regional Arts Society, which covers each... Britain was divided up into 10 regions at that time, and they were sort of disciples of the Crafts Council. They did the Crafts Council work, but within the regions of Great Britain.
So what happened a couple of years ago which caused you to suddenly stop making instruments?
Well, sadly, I had a very, very serious stroke. And while I was lying in the hospital bed, I had time to think about my future and whether I wanted to continue. But it coincided roughly my time for retirement anyway. I was way past retirement, but if I would not have retired had I not had the stroke. But there we are, I did have the stroke and I had to think differently. I had to certainly reduce the pressure I was putting on myself.
So just to go back to the book now, you describe quite a lot of this in detail, don't you? And
yes.
It is part of the reason you wrote the book, isn't it? Because one of your students, David Nixon, your guitar making students, is a writer as well.
That's right.
And he encouraged you to put your memoirs in this book.
Well, while we were working in the workshop, we were just chatting generally, and he was asking about my earlier life making musical instruments, and I was telling him some of the most interesting and funny stories. And sometimes not so funny, but he found it amazing because it's not within the experience or knowledge of most people, because it is really a very, very strange world, instrument making. And he ultimately said, well, I think there's a book there. Have you ever considered writing a book? And of course, my first response was, no, I hadn't. And he said, well, yeah, I think you should do it as a book. I'll give you a hand. So with that offer of help, I thought I would give it a try, which is what I've done. And he helped. He was tremendous support, yes.
Well, you've known a lot of famous guitarists in your lifetime, haven't you? And do you feel that they've helped to shape your instrument making in any way?
Of course. Bream was the first. Julian Bream was the actual very first guitarist I had met. He used to come to the workshop with David Rubio a lot and play instruments in the workshop, simply because he was then playing Rubio instruments, lute and guitar. John Williams came with you actually, Jerry. You were one of the early visitors, of course. And of course, since then, I've given up counting the guitarists, but it runs into the hundreds, if not thousands.
Yes. And you had quite a thriving career as a guitar maker. How many guitars did you actually make?
Well, I actually started counting there. All numbers of instruments are numbered. And the final figure was 1,199. And by the time I had the stroke, and I thought I should just round it up to 1,200. And even after the stroke, I did complete one more instrument.
Yes, it's extraordinary, really, what you've done. I think you've achieved a huge amount. Tell me one last thing about your time in the army. How did that come about?
It's true. I did join the army, and it was a quite deliberate choice. It was post national service, so I was a regular. I wasn't a national serviceman. But I just felt, having worked in that rather closed atmosphere, closed sort of bubble of Robert Goebbels, I thought I wanted to get in the big wide world and to get some experience. And I thought the best way to do it and to do it quickly, get the experience quickly, was to join the British Army.
Yeah, that's an interesting viewpoint. So where did you find yourself going, for instance?
Well, not far as that happened, but Germany was the furthest. Germany, North German plains, the Lüneburg Heath, and also Berlin. I was stationed in Berlin as well.
And you still go and see quite a lot of your old regiment. What regiment was that?
That was the 11th Hussars, the Cherry Pickers, a very famous cavalry regiment. Yeah. They led the charge in the Charge of the Light Brigade. That's how famous they are. And it was a very fine regiment, I have to say. I was very proud to be a member of that regiment.
Did you feel this was a really positive part of your life?
Oh, yes, indeed, because I was doing things that I never imagined I would do or could do. Particularly on the sports field. I was certainly heavily involved in sports and skiing and canoeing and climbing and athletics and cross-country running. But so I got so much as much learning about myself, which was the point of the exercise. So I achieved that by going into the British Army, yes.
And again, we've got some nice photos of you and some of your mates in your book, in fact.
Yes.
And you tell us a few stories in there about it. It's a very easy book to read, I have to say. It's like your conversational style. I find it very engaging.
Well, that's nice to hear, because that's how I would want it to be. Because I didn't want it to be highly technical. I could have talked about making guitars, but it would limit the appeal of the book to a wider audience. So I wanted to tell it really as a story, as an autobiography.
Well, it's been very nice to have lunch with you and to meet you again. It's not very far to go, and to see you, I mean. And thanks. And tell me a little bit about how you see, what's going to happen now with the future of guitar making in Britain.
Well, believe it or not, it's actually pretty healthy now. Largely because of the colleges that were established, but not long ago, only 30, 35 years ago, 40 years ago, teaching musical instrument making, and sadly they're now closing. But at least a lot of makers are now well established, and of course some of them may be teaching, I don't actually know, but they may be teaching as I did, and consequently they're passing on their knowledge and experience to the next generation, which I felt that was very important, and also as the reason I did teach so much.
I think that's a very nice way to end an interview. Thank you, Paul, for all you've given us. Not just the instruments, but also inspiration, and for your generous help in many ways.
It was always. I love doing it, and I love meeting guitarists. Not most guitarists.
Most guitarists.
And guitarists, particularly like you, Julie.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you for being a very pleasant gentleman.
That needs explaining.
And good luck with the book.
Right, thank you very much.
And thanks for lunch again, and we'll meet you very soon.
Okay, bye, Jerry.
Bye. Cheers.